All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast on what is the last episode of this year's summer series. And folks, are we going out with a bang? Because this story is powerful. Today, we are talking to an investor who was subject to coercive control around money at home growing up, and the story about how she broke free from this financial abuse. What else do we cover, Ben?
Well, Bryce, you know this is a story close to both of our hearts on many fronts. But what I love about this is when you face those challenges, how you overcome them and the inspiration that you get from overcoming them. So in this case, we hear great inspiration and great motivation from her mum as well.
This is an inspiring story, folks. Let's rip into it now.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, Ben, we've got a very special episode of the summer series today. We are talking with a TPC listener. Her name is Amanda Jakowski. Welcome to the Property Couch, Amanda.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. We're excited to chat about your story today. But you've been a listener, you know what the summer series is all about. We want to get to know you. We want to get to know a little bit about your background. So can you let us know what money conversations were like for you growing up in your family?
Sure. So there was probably two themes around money as I was growing up. On one hand, one of the themes was definitely around perception and keeping up with the Joneses and showing outwardly that things were quite financially good in our family, and it definitely probably looked and appeared that there was a fair bit of abundance happening. So a lot of the conversations around the dinner table had an element of, boastfulness or, positive outward perception about them. I think the other element of money conversations for me is that I very much grew up in an environment of coercive control, and money was one of those tools on the tool belt. So my father was the only person who brought in income as I was growing up. Mum was a stay-at-home mum, and it was the type of relationship for them as well as for us kids where money was very much his and distributed according to his certain set of rules. So whilst it felt like there was a lot of abundance around me, we had the lovely big home near the beach and the big boat on the front lawn and the cars and all of that sort of perception there. I think I certainly did not feel in control of money and certainly felt scarcity despite potentially that abundance around me.
It's a classic form, unfortunately, of financial abuse. We've talked about it before on the pod around these types of controlling behaviours that sometimes get demonstrated. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it is usually the male inside the household who is wielding their power, potentially through their argument that they may be the major breadwinner, and ultimately it is their money and for which they can pass on to their household. And that should never be a situation that any household should be in. And so that's really a powerful opening from you, Amanda, in terms of what that looks like. How was that? You've given us a couple of examples of how that was displayed, but it obviously left a lasting sort of impression on you around money behaviours and how you are meant to behave around money. Can you share a little bit more of those insights for us?
Sure. So I think for me, I certainly observed the fact that my mum was given a pay packet every week. And as she had that particular amount of money, that's how everything needed to be managed. And anything outside of that was certainly a request that she needed to make of my father. And I think one of the challenging elements there is growing up, I didn't quite realize the goalposts always felt to me like they were moving. So you could ask for one thing one day and it'd be a no, and ask for a very similar thing the next day and it would be yes. And I could never really initially work that out. But when I came to understand that, when it was through a lens of, does this serve my father? So certainly having some narcissistic traits there, that you could ask for one thing and, well, okay, it might be in an environment where others might see it. Yes, you can have it. It's an environment where nobody sees it. Well, then no, you can't, kind of thing. So it felt very, the goalposts were moving constantly. The element of sort of psychological safety, physical safety, financial safety, all of those kinds of things were very much, shifting plates underneath where you are, and also that when I say it's one of the tools on the tool belt, some of the other tools were definitely around things like self-worth, and making sure that definitely saying things to my mother around, if you leave me, you're not going to have this and you're not going to have that and all that kind of thing, similar to us, keeping those that self-worth pretty low, and being able to control things emotionally, financially, physically, whatever that needed to look like. For me, there was also an element of gender disparity. So there's two daughters. I'm the eldest. There's my sister and there's my brother. And there was very much a theme around, the boys inherit the family name, and there's something was certainly more positive towards the males in the family. My brother reports not feeling scarcity at all. He definitely always felt abundance, and anything that he wanted and needed was certainly there. And my sister and myself and my mum felt differently. So that obviously created a mindset for me as well.
So when did he become aware of that he was being treated differently compared to his two sisters?
Growing up, any time that I brought up examples of that, he very much was like, no, that's not the case. We've had conversations even just this year, and he's certainly been expressing that to me, that he never felt, because I would say, well, this is how it felt for me. My mum would say, well, this is how it felt for me. And he would be like, okay, I don't know if I was younger. I don't know if I was what. For me, there was definitely some being unaware of it, one element being gender, for sure.
Yeah, there's a real big disparity too, because you're the eldest, and the eldest often get lots of things tried out on them, and the youngest get away with a lot of things too. So there's a whole bunch of dynamics going on there. Can you help us better understand what that meant for you and your sister and your mum? Were you observing any budgeting? Was there any sort of money management on display, or was it just this just total utter control, goalpost changing? And it sounds like I think I just heard you say that if your dad could leverage what other people thought of him, so if there was an audience when the money was on show, that was great. If there was no audience, there wasn't. So can we go a little bit further on those impressions? And you said it was it became a self-esteem thing. How did that play out through teenage years?
Yeah, so what I would observe money-wise from my mum, I remember her once using a lot of lay-bys to try and make it all work, and buy us gifts and all those kinds. So she made a lot of stuff work on not very much. And I remember one particular time where she would give us a gift that she just had been putting lay-by away for a really long time. And to my father, that would have been, here, just have it, right? But it had a lot more meaning, that she had worked within the boundary that she'd worked. So that was the only real financial things that I saw. On the other side, I certainly saw, lots of spending, boats and cars and all. I never really saw any money management. In terms of the perception and the self-worth part there, I think it really affected my teenage years, I would say, a little bit more. So in my teenage years, as soon as I turned, I think the legal age in New South Wales was 13 and 9 months at the time, I fronted up to the Woolworths manager and asked him very politely if I could have a job. And he gave me that job. It wasn't something I got permission for ahead of time from my parents. But anyway, I did that. And then I worked as much as I could to build up some of my own financial independence. I think what that impacted me on one hand was to try and move into finding my own source of income. But then on the other hand, my behaviours were, as a teenager, not very much about taking care of myself and making bad choices and those type of things. And what that led to was I was literally sent away to boarding school. So they didn't tell me that they enrolled me, didn't get a chance to sort of say goodbye to anybody. But a week or so before starting year 11, I was taken out of the small town and down New South Wales South Coast that I lived and promptly put into a very, very different environment, which was boarding school, where you could only leave 2 weekends a term. So that was I called it going from planet Mars to planet Venus. It was just a very, very different environment.
What was the major impact that had on you?
I think I moved out of one environment where things were obviously challenging into another environment that had a little bit more stability, but certainly a lot of control and all of those kinds of things as well. It felt very punitive, like, you're being sent away. I think the main theme that it came back for me was that let's pay somebody else to raise her. It's getting a bit too hard for us to do that. And that's sort of the take-home message that I got, is let's pay the big expensive boarding school in Sydney, and they can take care of it from there. So it did, obviously it felt quite challenging.
Amanda, there's obviously a fair bit going on here. Your mother was a stay-at-home mum, and obviously your father is the major breadwinner inside the household. You talked about his narcissism. What about, obviously he's chasing envy, right? We call it keeping up with the Joneses, but the modern terminology now is just chasing envy, and that's the biggest challenge we've got really around social media and everything else that's being, these perceptions that are being grown around the world. It's crazy. It's a waste of time. You don't want to go after that. How secure was he personally, and self-assured? What was his backstory in terms of, to become the person that he was? Did he grow up in a hard household? Did he grow up without money? Did he grow up with money? What's the backstory there?
The backstory there is any person I ever met in his family referred to him as the golden boy, so that he could never do anything wrong. Even though he would outwardly do things wrong, he wouldn't be punished for it. He was the eldest son. There was another son. It was a domestic violence relationship, so the parents, he certainly remembered things like, the stake on the eye and stuff of mum and all of that. So, that obviously translated from his household into his new household. When obviously I came along later, so I did see that there was money. I'm not sure before, when I came along, what the money situation was, but they certainly weren't in scarcity growing up. And I think it really just came down to the fact that he wasn't disciplined, was told that he was amazing at every point and turn, and that kept being reiterated. And I think he just, whether he was born with it, whether it was conditioned, whether it was both, certainly just came into my recollection as someone who every decision and every thought goes through the filter of self. So, it's very hard to have a really deep connection as a partner, I would imagine. It's certainly very hard to have a deep connection as a daughter with somebody who puts them, because naturally, as a parent, you put yourself first. So his backstory, I think, definitely came from violence, but definitely came from a lack of, appropriately raising your kids right, I would just say.
Yeah. So, so you're being incredibly courageous and vulnerable here. So thank you. So what messages do you take on? Because how, I think back to some of the things that my mum and dad did, and I take all the great parts, and then there's a few things that I said I would do differently. How did you use that as a leverage point to say, well, this is the bit that I want to keep, or perhaps none, and here's how I want to model my life, so it's nothing to do with all of those narcissistic things you talked about. How did you use that as a way to shape your future?
Yeah, obviously it certainly shaped me. And I think as I went into, because I'm married and I have 2 children of my own, the parts that I've taken into that is, my husband and I are very selfless towards the kids, and certainly put their needs first, but not in a way that's about, the label clothes or the fancy devices, or I think I certainly repel when I see people very much outwardly appearing to be quite, here's my wealth on display. I raise them with what I believe are good money lessons. So, for example, not buying them cars, giving them appropriate boundaries around, well, if you want that, then that's a gift, or, getting jobs, all of those kinds of things. So I lean into love and support, but definitely don't respond very well at all to perception-y type things, which is hard as young kids grow up because they want the latest device and the latest this and the latest that, the latest iPhone, the latest whatnot. So, I'm sure the kids aren't too impressed about the boundaries that I put there, but as they're getting a bit older, they're expressing to me a little bit of gratitude around that.
And is your dad still in your life?
No, so between my engagement party and my wedding, we cut contact at that point, and I was married 20 years ago. So it has been 2 decades. My sister cut ties with him first. She's 2 years younger, but she did that first. Then I did, and my brother still has him in his life. So that's been 2 decades now. And the main catalyst around that, as you can hear between engagement and a wedding, is I actually transitioned into a situation where I was having a relationship and I was getting married, and I wanted some things to be about me. And obviously that doesn't go down very well when it needs to be things about him. So that was where I finally drew a line in the sand that said, you know what, and being with somebody else, because it was my normal, being with somebody else going, this is not normal, this is not right. You're allowed to pick your wedding party. You're allowed to all of those kinds of things. I'm like, okay. So a combination of having someone who loves you in the right way and says, even though kind of parts of it you overtly know are wrong, there's subliminal stuff you don't necessarily see. So that was very much a catalyst of, this is how it's going to be. If you'd like to come to the wedding, you're welcome. If you're not, you're not. And he didn't come. And that was sort of the end of that.
Wow.
And I walked myself down the aisle by myself very proudly. And that was, a really good moment for me.
You're an incredible woman. You're really brave.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful, and it's a powerful message for our community. Bryce, in a couple of the other episodes, talked about his situation in terms of, Bryce, when you're on the selling side of new properties and doing that type of work. I've told my backstory around financial abuse, and that money always was a big argument story in my household. And it was a form of financial abuse from my father towards my mother. So she got the same thing. So she'd work part-time, and any of that money she earned would go to her needs and so forth. But she'd get an allowance as well. And ultimately where most of the debates around having enough was because she would have Jeremy and me in her ear saying, we want this, we want this, we want this. And she's basically got an allowance and she's got to make it work. What's interesting for us, though, is we didn't have the fancy cars. We didn't have, we just grew up in lower middle class or middle class sort of society. And my dad's trade-off was delayed gratification. There's no doubt my mum loved to spend money. She'd find a reason to, buy that latest vase or whatever whatever it was. So there is definitely a delicate balance. And in a lot of these sort of summer series conversations we have is about, were you both on the same page with money? And usually it's one of those, sort of elements that potentially drive people apart, because if there's no commonality or no connection around, that there's two of us on this journey together in a relationship, then ultimately you're going to continually keep hitting, these speed bumps, and that sometimes can result obviously in, separation and divorce. So that is an interesting story. And I suppose to the point that I've made in terms of that, and how I've reconciled it for myself, because I still have obviously a loving relationship with both my mum and my dad, but I still, to this day are coaching my dad around the behaviours. But then I look at his backstory, and he grew up in an abusive household as a single child. His father was a prisoner of war for 5 years in Europe. With the Germans. And so he saw atrocities and horrible things. They didn't have a lot of money when he got back. His mum was abusive to him physically and also emotionally. So you can once you put all the pieces together, you can start to see how the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And so that's an interesting story. And so, Bryce and I have openly shared about our stories of what that looks like for us and how we've said, I want to take this work ethic from my dad. I want to take, this tenderness and love from my mum, and I want to put those two together and I want to improve. But we're also still finding ourselves doing behaviours that sometimes are like, oh, geez, that's my dad's coming at me there, and I need to step back from it. So being aware of it is one step, but then also making change and behaviours around that is another. I wanted to share that just to let you know that there are other means by which that's happening, and obviously that's an important message for our community, that it comes in all different forms and sizes. It comes in different levels of what that looks like. My question to round out what has been a pretty difficult conversation is around your mother, and is she still in that relationship with your father?
No, so they had quite a challenging divorce when I was in university. It went through court and dragged on for a really long time. After on the day of the divorce and the court case finalising, I did get a call from both of them. My mum called and said I got everything that I wanted, plus I got my legal fees paid for. And then my father called me and said I get everything I wanted, but I paid these legal fees I didn't want to. And it really smacked me in the face that whole journey, they both knew exactly that, like, there was an opportunity there, that they exactly both knew what they wanted. But no, we had to go through a really prolonged and challenging period. And I think, again, that was somebody whose wife is leaving them, and that was very much an out of control situation for somebody who wanted to be in control. So they definitely 25 years of marriage, that's quite a long time to be married, and my mum was very insecure moving forward into her new life as to what that would look like. If we fast forward that now, my mum actually used property as a tool to build wealth coming out of the settlement. And we're in the process at the moment of just finally landing the last step plane in the next financial year. And she has a very lovely passive income from property. And for someone to start that in their 40s, who has starting at the bottom on a career again, and then to be able to build that up in a short period of time and create the retirement lifestyle that she's got now, that's been a very inspiring thing for me.
It's
100%.
Brilliant.
Is there? Can we lean into that, Amanda, to the extent that you're happy to share? Like that's amazing. That's someone starting again, and not only starting again but thriving. What did that look like?
Yeah, so she ended up starting a new career, and she did study, which she hadn't obviously done since school. Went into more of a healthcare type field, and an entry level type of wage. She did get out of the settlement the family home, and the family home was down in the coastal town. So having a different growth rate to what a Sydney or a Melbourne would have. But what she did is she put in some hard yards. She sold that property, and she bought out her. Happened to just before they divorced, I think this was, bought out the other siblings from her mum and dad's property in Sydney. So she then made that her home. She turned the garage, because it was on a corner block, into a granny flat. So she's got dual income from that property, and I think she bought it for 400, and it's now like 1.6, 1.8 or something crazy like that. So that's been a really important rock in the jar. And she bought a couple of properties in Newcastle and another couple in Batemans Bay, but she had moved through kind of selling the Batemans Bay ones, and has certainly got some. What she'll end up with after we sell one of the Newcastle properties is being debt free, having a little bit of super, less than 100,000, but having some dual income, passive income from one property, one from Newcastle, plus some bits and pieces with shares and things, and all of that adds up together to make a really nice portfolio. But she did that all herself. So she did lean into a property group at one point, which didn't go so well, but she researched and purchased and got out there and educated herself and DIY'd it.
And Amanda, can we just make sure that she obviously joined the workforce again to get the income to allow her to do that, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so she had the equity from the properties, as in to form the basis of the deposit, but then she had the income. And I think also because her costs were pretty low at that point, as we were transitioning a bit sort of out into the world, and debt-free home and all of those kinds of things. And back in the day, borrowing capacity was a lot easier. So she did, you couldn't do that now. She was able, she has one 10-year interest-only loan and one 30-year or something, like lending that you just can't get now. So that certainly helped.
Helped her along the way. Brilliant.
We shouldn't gloss over that too quickly, because you've got someone who's been in a relationship with someone who's got massive coercive control, and the mental mooring lines that your mum would have had to overcome just to be okay to be independent, let alone going into property investing. Like you said, there was a club, but I don't know where that was on the timeline or the journey, but that's a massive transformation in your mum's mind. I mean, who did she lean on? What was the inner strength? What was the internal conversation she was having with herself? If you've had those conversations with her, because I mean, we're looking in the rear vision mirror. Of course, you'd buy investment properties, but that's downplaying some of the mental gymnastics you have to do just to even get to the starter's gate.
Yeah, and I didn't realize my mum's strength prior to that point, because obviously you have a different perception when you're in a relationship where your self-worth isn't very high. She definitely went through a good period of time of mourning and struggling and feeling quite depressed and those kinds of things. At the time, I was definitely in boarding school. I certainly wasn't living there, maybe even at uni, but my sister was there and my brother was there. So my sister did take a bit of a lead role, getting my brother to and from school and looking after my mum. And so that was challenging. And so my sister did a really great job supporting my mum. As my mum started to surface out of that, my understanding is she wanted to create a new life for herself, and the confidence came over time. So it certainly didn't just suddenly appear. But she just, she would do some study, and that would give her confidence. She would get the job, and that would give her confidence. She'd manage her own money, and that, oh look, he said I would, things would all go pear shaped. And so it kind of was this incremental building of confidence over time. And then I'm really not sure. I've never asked the question, what made you think, hey, I'm going to buy an investment property? But she had lived experience seeing property do quite well over time, right? Her mum's and dad's place that she bought, obviously that did really well, and her own home and things like that. So I'm really not sure where the idea came from. But as her confidence grows, you would definitely describe her now as a fiercely independent person. And even to the point where if somebody's not doing the right thing by her or her chickens, as she calls us, she will certainly step up and, be advocating and doing all those things for us. So I would say it was incremental. I'm not sure where the idea came from, but I think with every win and every success, and she's got a much more supportive partner now. And he did have a backstory, just happened to have a backstory in property as well, property development. But essentially very supportive as well. So I think all of those things just added up.
So you said when you're in uni they separated. So what are we talking, 15 to 20 years ago when she separated?
Yeah, I suppose so. So 1999, something like that, 1998, something of that nature.
So still pre a lot of the content that's out there. Back then there was no podcast, no YouTube, a couple of magazines. So that's incredible.
No social media, none of that kind of, so
the good old
magazines
days.
and Jan Summers books.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I should ask her about that, but yeah, amazing.
Now we know for you the fruit hasn't fallen far from the tree, because you've got a successful property portfolio. We'll build to that story, but can you tell us what the first independent, like you talked about, as soon as you're at age, you went to Woolies, and then you got sent off to boarding school. So there's some independence. But when you started outside of schooling and into your first job, with that as a backstory, what did money look like for you when you had a breakout? How do people break out of coercive control? Do you go on a spending spree, or did you still build the storehouse?
Bit of both. So when I was at university, I had some essentials providers in terms of accommodation, but the fees and the everything and the living and everything, that was certainly something I needed to manage myself. So I promptly went out and got a job as a waitress, and so therefore I was also working a lot when others were going out, so I wasn't going out as much. Obviously studying as well. I did 5 years at university, so that over that sort of 5-year period, I was doing a lot of waitressing, and my first rock in the jar was my car. So I hadn't had a car, and I didn't live anywhere near the university and all of those things, so lots of public transport, and my desire was to buy my own car. And it took me 2 years of waitressing to get $3,000, and I bought my little Mazda 3. And I was immensely proud of that car. And that was definitely, keeping the discretionary spending down and focusing on that goal was something that was, important. But on the sideline, in comes a gentleman who I was later to marry in that period of time. And when we met, we actually transitioned our financial stories together pretty quickly. So within a few months, we'd moved in together. Within a few weeks of that, we had a joint bank account. We moved into those relationships with debt. I had HECS, he had personal debts, and so we were behind the eight ball. We got a property that we really shouldn't have spent that much on the rent. We went out and we spent a lot on, fancy cheeses and things when we were doing our groceries. We kind of, went a bit nuts in the first sort of 6 to 12 months. And within 6 to 12 months, we'd moved to a cheaper rental. We were having very different behaviours around money, and we were starting to talk about the future and starting to put some more rocks in the jar as that focus. So, I think a bit of everything.
Was that revenge spend? Was that revenge spending from coercive control, or is that just exuberance of a new phase of life?
Both, I'd say. And also my husband's love language is a little bit about buying me things as well. And he doesn't have great guardrails when it comes, well, back then he didn't, he's much more evolved now, but he was definitely in the spending category. So when you've got someone in the spending category, it kind of almost forced me to be in the, well, let's take the reins on this a little bit more category, or else if you had two of those people together, it would have been quite disastrous. But then I had a lot of anxiety about that because I'm like, but I don't want to be the person doing coercive control over my husband. So it made me feel quite uncomfortable to be the reins around money, and wanted to do it in a way that's like, but do you agree with this? Like, if we're going to have this as a goal and we're going to change this behavior, we need to have the same, it needs to be both our decision.
Both on the same page. And so just, can you give us an idea of how you organised your money? So, what was the sort of, did you have a system back in those days?
It's pretty straightforward when you don't have a lot of money. Doesn't need to be too many jars. So it was pretty much, I would definitely say living pay to pay for sure. Yep. And especially as I got my first entry-level job out of university, I think it was like $30,000 or something, like not a huge salary. And so and my husband is a police officer, so he was just going through the academy and having his first, so he was at the entry level beginning of his career as well. So we did have a joint bank account. Money hit there every fortnight or week or whatever that looked like. And then we would, work within a certain element of money from the day-to-day stuff and the rent and all of that. But we just always sort of really carved out a little bit of thinking about future goals. Definitely.
Nice.
So nothing sophisticated, just leave some left over.
But just enough to keep the books afloat.
Absolutely. Have more coming in and less going out, I guess.
Running the books in a solvent manner, not an insolvent manner.
Exactly.
Sorry, did I just hear something that you don't hear very often? You actually spent less than you earned? Wow.
That's the plan, yeah.
And then invest the difference and wait. That's pretty much the secret. So, okay, so Ben and I know that you have a property portfolio which became a priority. So if we could start to lean towards where did the spark? What was the property journey? What was the first jump onto the ladder? Can you sort of give us an idea of what that looked like, please?
Yeah, so our first sort of rocks in the jar previous to that were paying for our own wedding and honeymoon, which we saved up when we did. My mum gave us $2,000, but each of those things were $30,000 each. So we did lean into that quite a bit, and then we. Once we were married, we lent into having a family. So my son came along, and we really didn't think that we were able to buy property. We thought, we sat down, we did the numbers, and we thought we have to make a choice. Are we going to have children and then a house, or a house and then children? And we ended up landing on the children. So I really honestly at that point in time felt like we're planning 3. We ended up with 2. I'm surprised we ended up with 2 because they're both quite challenging pregnancies and little ones. But we ended up, when my son was 1, jumping onto the property ladder in a way that I really wasn't expecting to happen. And that was, again, kudos to Mum. She did the parental guarantor thing. And back in that day, they'd launched 100% loans plus a $7,000 first home buyers grant. So on, an oily rag, we jumped onto the property ladder in our little villa in Sydney, 1970s. It was, I'm also 1970s vintage, so it was as old as me and never been renovated or touched or anything. It was in quite poor condition, but we got it for the bones. We got it because it was for the space.
Now, Amanda, I've been pretty vocal on the pod about sequencing family versus having a property behind you. Without your mum's support, both financially and also for equity, do you think it would have been possible if you had continued on the pathway with children first?
Absolutely not. And my son and daughter both had significant medical complications. And although we always planned into things, so it's like, okay, we're going to think about having a family here. In fact, the very month and year that we thought we would have Matthew, we did. My daughter came when she was good and ready. That was a bit different. But we saved into that. So we saved into parental leave, knowing that we'd move through some of that money. And then the idea was to save into it and move through it again. But we didn't envisage more than $20,000 of out-of-pocket medical costs across each kitty and some other things that had happened in that time. So even though we planned and we saved and we did all the things we thought were right, life does throw you some curveballs sometimes. And there's absolutely no way we would have gotten on the property ladder without all of those things coming together.
Okay, so you bought this first property. What happened next?
Yeah, so I was going through a period of time of, Matt was 1. He took his first steps in the villa. And then my daughter, there's a 3-year gap. So there was definitely, some part-time work on my part and then casual because you couldn't go back full-time in my industry at the time. And then, and then getting pregnant again. And I was very sick for both the pregnancies and couldn't work and all that. So just money was survival for a good many years into that villa and largely untouched. I think we put in a couple of built-ins and maybe some paint. But there wasn't the grant, effectively, the first home buyers grant. We did a little bit of touch-ups and nothing kind of changed. Then we went through a bit of a phase of me rebuilding and back into the workforce and bringing some income. During the time that we had the kiddies, we made it a priority, and I don't say this in any judgment because it's not possible for everybody, but we decided not to send the kids into any childcare till they were 3. So we would work across 7 days. He would work I would do 2 days and he would do the other 5 across the weekend. And we'd not see each other for a good long time. And so again, that was more the financial priority. So it took a really long time before we were able to jump on the property ladder again. And we also did some renovations and things on the property as the kids got, financially things got a bit better as well. In the end, we'd actually renovated every single square inch of that villa before we left. And so 2003, we bought that property. It wasn't until I think about 2014 before we jumped on the property ladder again.
And so you're about to go on this journey of jumping on the property ladder again. I'm assuming you've got decisions to make, right? You've got a growing family who need probably a little bit more space. So you've got the big rocks in the jar conversation around principal place of residence versus potentially investing. What sort of thinking did you do around that? How did you come to a decision? And did you seek any advice around that, or were you basically self-determining?
Yeah, so we bought the villa in a location that wasn't very far away from Mum because of the whole priority we had around family. But it was in no way convenient to my work. I drove an hour 45 one way, an hour and a half back as I was working. So it wasn't convenient. And it took us a really long time to just get functional bathrooms and kitchens and things. Obviously, there is a temptation when you've got borrowing capacity because the banks at that time typically would give us more than what we could pay back. But luckily, we recognised that. And we went out to Kelly Villa as it was starting to be developed, and we went into those lovely big display homes and we're like, oh, you can have this. And we were really seriously talking about doing that as the next step. But we ended up a little bit of motivation of me seeing the previous generations before spend 30 years paying off a mortgage and then living on the pension. A combination of me really wanting to do that different and having good financial independence. A piece around the fact that when I had both my kiddies and they were very sick, I felt really forced back into work financially, and I really didn't want that for my children either. So a combination of all of those things, we ended up saying, let's stay put. We'll stay in the, we've got 2 meter backyard and running kids, and, one bathroom and all of those things, and not convenient for anyone's work and all of that kind of stuff. Sure, we could change that, or we could invest for our future. And we definitely had those tough conversations and decided to invest in the future. The first step we took was to get some professional help. The business structure and the organisation isn't the same as it was back then. But I dragged George along to lots of courses on weekends, and we do property courses, and I just felt like even though I'd read books and do courses, I wasn't in a position to execute it myself. So we went along and saw some professionals. They built out a plan for us, a plan that, again, you couldn't execute now, right? 10 properties in 5 years and all of those kinds of things. So we started on that journey, but it wasn't the kind of thing where the business purchased the property. You would be given the suburb or suburbs, and off you would go. So you would, a lot of DIY.
And Amanda, just the 10 properties in 10 years type story. Can you just explain what the pitch was and what the strategy was that they were sort of advocating for?
Yeah. So as I look back on it now, the strategy was accumulate $3 million of property. Divided by 10 is 10 $300,000 properties was the brief, and the goal was that we would reach a passive income target. And off the top of my head, I honestly cannot remember what it is, but it was a passive income target for retirement. And it was about, using our borrowing capacity, which was obviously really generous at the time based on lending being a little bit different. And that was effectively it. The plan in the report wasn't very extensive. It was just, we'll help you to buy property every 6 months.
So the building blocks are these. As long as I can borrow the money and as long as my property goes up, and if I have a really high yield, then I should be, and I pick the right location, all of those things being equal, I should be able to get a property a year. And then ultimately after that time, and then I get to 10 properties. And in some cases, to live off that passive income, I might sell 2 or 3 of them as part of that. But very, very rudimentary very top line sort of modeling around what that story looked like. Yeah, I was obviously, I'm of the same era as you. I was around those sort of conversations and seeing those sort of models and attending the same workshops and same sort of, the 10,000 hours as we did to develop our own skill sets back in those days. And so, that was at the time. I mean, you also got to remember there were low docs and no docs. So in some cases, you didn't even need to have an income to be able to get access to lending. To your point, the debt to income ratios were not even relevant. Lending was certainly more accessible than potentially what cash flows could allow. And so it was always potentially a risk. And Bryce has, on previous podcasts, has talked about live off the equity, and basically live off, draw an income off the equity in the property and let the interest capitalize, but you're still going to have a really nice, meaningful life, but you'll be left with nothing. There'll be no legacy or inheritance left behind. So, but to your point, you still, you had enough level of, I want to build my knowledge, which I commend you on in terms of we're going to be more informed, and then ultimately, but it was left to you to potentially execute on the purchase.
Yes. Yeah. We were given lists of suburbs, essentially given a little bit of feedback on properties that we might be interested in and in a top level way, but definitely the finding the property managers. And in fact, of the 10 properties in 5 years story, we got halfway through 5. All of those, there's only one that I've seen once, and that's just because I happened to be down in Melbourne for work and there was an inspection. So it was very much a sight unseen. situation as we accrued those properties, which was I needed the education, being someone who needs to be in control, and the risk mitigation to be able to move forward on that. But we did get halfway through that journey. And yes, in terms of the back end of the story, there was really no plan around land the debt plane. There was some concepts in there, but we just didn't quite get to that part of the journey.
So have you morphed the 10 in 5? The 10 in 5. It's now you've gone halfway and you've done the 5. How have you morphed the entry strategy to your current strategy now?
Yeah, so as we were talking about before, the villa wasn't necessarily serving us. And the lifestyle that we had wasn't really serving us. So we did want to do a home upgrade. And the further along the investment journey you go, the harder it is to get borrowing capacity, especially as time went on. And we really felt that if we went any further on that journey, that we would not be able to upgrade our home. And we kind of knew that we'd even need to sell the first one to launch into sort of the upgrade home. I did have an epiphany moment as we were living in Sydney. I went to a particular piece of furniture we had where there was a whole bunch of scripts, and I was holding the script for my son's mental health, my husband's mental health, my daughter, my migraine medicine, my mental health. My daughter had a medication there, I can't remember what it was. And I'm holding these scripts and going, we're medicating our way through this life. This is not we need to live differently. So we did the sit down again. Do we really want to be living like this and working like this and all of this kind of thing? And what are the elements about our life that we like? What are the bits that we want to change? And we did a complete U-turn and left Sydney and left the property and left the jobs and left the schools and left everything. That was right in the middle of the bushfires and 2 months before COVID. So we did all of that, but we definitely came to a stop on the investment property side of things with a view that we wanted to change our life. So the home was part of that, but there was a bigger story around what we wanted to do.
Yeah, and you've recently moved into your dream home as well, and that's a lot of people say that they want to make those changes, Amanda, but not a lot of people actually do. So, what do you think? What do you think was the driver from? Clearly, those scripts are not fun, right? So that was the catalyst. But what do you think? What do you think it is about you and George and the kids that actually? I've got a television show where people come on and they say, "Oh, we'd like to escape from the city," and then I take them, I show them the properties, and then we follow them up later and we go, "Oh, we decided not to move," right? So it happens all the time, but you didn't do it. Why do you think? Why do you think you actually did make that leap? Because it's difficult to transition kids and get new networks, and you've got to be emotionally resilient whilst you make these changes, and sometimes you feel a bit wobbly as well. So what do you think separates you?
I think I harnessed my inner mum and just went, if I put my mind to it, and this is something that I was really motivated by creating a better life, whatever that looked like, just creating a better life. And I'd hear definitely the kids, watching them having their farewells from school, that's heartbreaking, saying goodbye to their friends, not wanting to go, all of those things about trying to create a new career and trying to create, my husband transitioned across to a different role in the police. So he was a detective out there all the time. Now he's in teaching at the academy. So as he went through, that was a really difficult process. Every sort of challenge that we faced, finding somewhere to live, trying to still balance work and life and all of those kinds of things, I just kind of dug deep and just kept the goal, like whatever it was that I was seeing in front of me, and that I felt that I needed to do it. So that because I felt if we kept going the way that we were, I wasn't going to be raising the kids and giving them the best start in life that I felt that they deserved. So that was really the guiding light.
Yeah.
So this is a big pivot, and effectively, wait a minute, we had a property plan, and we've got, we're halfway through. We've bought 5 properties. Do we now have to sell a couple of them? Do we have to look at the performance of those? How well were they going? And you've been a listener of the pod. When did all that sort of start to shape up, and what sort of changes were you prepared to make?
Yeah, so when we were looking at the dream home, we had some conversations about keeping all of the properties or not keeping all of the properties. We knew that if we kept all of the properties, it would cap the price for our dream home. And we just made the conscious choice that, okay, this is the cap, this is all we've got. And we know that we needed to let go of the property in Sydney, which, we're feeling a little bit nervous about because it's obviously a good market, but looked at the performance, and villas don't typically perform the same as houses and things. And it was something that was standing in the way of what we wanted. So we did sell that property, capital gains tax free. We rented for a little while and then tried to find where our new budget would land for us. We lived in 3 different locations across Canberra until we found the one that best suited. And that was a matter of getting the kids embedded where their friends are, where their schools are. My son and daughter both had school changes while we were here, all of those kinds of things. So we just decided we'd worked really hard to build out that portfolio, very hard to hold on to it, currently working very hard to hold on to it. And so if we want that longer term goal and the things that we want for, that gift that I want to give the kids so they don't have to work if life throws them a curveball, we decided to hold on to those properties and just work within our budget. So we found the dream home. We compromised a little bit on location, and definitely she's not a gorgeous home as yet. She's got lots of great bones, but we'll make her beautiful if and when, money allows. But we just wanted to keep at the centre of that, working within the money that we had and having the goals, which was a really large, lovely space for my son. He's got his own really big room, which is basically a lounge room, a bedroom, and everything all in one. And he's access to come and go and do those things. My daughter got the master bedroom with the walk-in wardrobe and the bathroom. My husband and I are on a different part of the house, but we've got the pool, we've got the views over the mountains, we've got all the things that you can't change, and then we'll work on the things that you can change over time.
It's brilliant. So, Amanda, you know this stat really well, but 73% of all property investors stop at 1, and then a further, anyone who has 1 or 2, it's 91%. So 9 out of 10 have 1 or 2. So you now have the dream home and 5 investment properties. So how's your time horizon perspective now? Because it's just a game of waiting now. It's kind of letting time do its work. Is the queue in the rack on buying?
Queues in the rack on buying. There's a gentleman called Ben Kingsley who said land the debt plane once, and I really leaned into that and said, okay, we're in the land the debt plane phase at the moment. Accumulation is complete. We're going to focus on paying down our home first, and then move through the paying down of the investment properties until we reach a certain target. We're not the targets are. We definitely have a plan and a time frame that we're aiming for, but also a little bit of liquidity on that, right? Life throws you curveballs and things, but the general plan is that we're working towards paying off our home and doing some improvements there, and then having that as soon as we can meet that passive income target, which is really about debt reduction. It's not about accumulation anymore. We have the option. My husband loves his work and it's very much part of his identity. So we'll just see how that, we've got a goal for that, but, we'll just see how that plays out. And obviously I enjoy my work as well. So I think it's more we can at a certain point, and then we'll just see.
Well, that Ben Kingsley, I know he doesn't look it, but he is a pretty wise sort of guy. But hey, I'd like to sort of mesh the story now, because the TPC, the podcast had an impact on you, but it actually morphed into something more. So can you tell us how you came across the podcast, and obviously what you're doing now?
Yeah, so as we relocated our lives to Canberra, I wasn't working, and because I was getting the kids set up and my husband set up, and it was a real opportunity for me. I ended up taking a redundancy, which was really helpful as well, to, what do I want the rest of my career to look like? So I was able to sit down and piece together, well, what are you doing in your spare time? Well, you like going to opens and you've got property and, thinking about motivators and guides like my mum and all that. And I was like, could I potentially make a career out of this? And what are the key things that are important to me? And the key things that are important to me are being able to help and guide others. I like sort of, coaching and helping and helping people move forward, helping them to find financial independence and freedom and all of those kinds of things. It would be really impactful as well. And property as that vehicle, how could I put that together as a potential career? And so I started leaning into the industry, found a book and found a podcast by both of you, and started to lean into that. I did spend a good amount of time going to different organizations and their kind of like their nights where they meet clients or those kinds of things, because I was trying to look for, if I'm going to try and make a career out of this, the first thing I needed to do was do the QPIA, so the course called the Qualified Property Investment Advisor. I was doing that, and while I was doing that course and getting that qualification, I was going around a lot of organizations to try and find the one that would fit for me. I felt like as I was sitting in some of those presentations, I could really clearly see through the presentations, and I was getting anxious and alarm bells, but I was very conscious that the people sitting around me didn't. And so I thought, okay, I must have some sort of radar here. And so I kept going through those meetings, going through those organizations, and I decided that I would make my list from top down as to what organizations I wanted to focus on. Top of that list happened to be a company called Empower Wealth. So I wrote an email to Ben and Bryce and said, here's my qualification. I've just completed the QPIA. Here's my resume. It's going to be very heavily based in science and management and pharmaceutical industry and corporate. However, I've been doing some of these other things, and I would really like the opportunity to talk to you about potentially becoming a property investment advisor at your company.
And now the rest is history, because you are a property investment advisor in our business, and you are an exceptionally talented one at that, which is wonderful. So I'm stoked that that you're a part of our team. But so this podcast actually came about because I normally ask the question of all of our summer series guests, why did you come onto the podcast? But we have an interesting backstory to that. So there is something that you're really passionate about, and I reckon we should talk about that passion, and then we might circle on the end about how you ended up on here. But talk to us about some of the things that you approached me about, which initially you thought, this will be a great idea for a podcast for you and Ben to do, but it's now pivoted to us talking about it now.
Yeah, so I'm really happy meeting with people and talking with them and helping them and doing my job. This wasn't something I was necessarily looking out for and seeking. In fact, there was a fair bit of time I needed to take to reflect on it and say yes to you, Bryce, when you suggested the idea that took me completely from left of centre. But I reached out to you because I knew that you were doing lots of great work on the podcast, and I was trying to find out a way to mesh one of my passions with the work that you were doing. So the passion that I have is really about closing the gap on property for women specifically. And what I mean by that is there's lots of great content out there, but to try and sort of summarize it, and a shout out to the Core Logic Women in Property report every year, that's a really good one that I'd encourage people to have a look at. But effectively, when you think about gender disparity, and you can see in my history why I'd be interested in that, there is still a wage gap in Australia. It's about 22.8% across the wage gap, women and men doing essentially the exact same role. It's different in different industries, so it's most pronounced in our industry, which is finance. It comes about from things like women are much more likely to be part-time or casual. They're much more likely to be in caring roles. They get paid less. They're much more likely to have time out of the workplace. All of those kinds of things. And also, and earning less, it's a lot harder to build up that deposit or have that borrowing capacity. And what that essentially translates into is, if you looked at the statistics on property ownership in Australia and you put to the side all the properties that are co-owned, male and female, you just put those to the side for a minute, the most common ownership structure after that is a single male. Then we later get down the track and it's a single female. Then you get down a little bit more and it's two males. And then you get down even further and it's two females. So there's definitely a disparity in property ownership. There's a disparity in that women are more likely to have, say, units. Men are more likely to have houses. Women are more likely to have cheaper properties. Men are more likely to have more expensive properties. So if you have a cheaper unit, that's going to perform differently to a house that's got some good land value and in a good location. So that widens further. We've got lots of stats on super being different. So it's in no way an anti-male sentiment at all. It's just more about the fact that there's things in life that are very real, very complex, very hard to kind of solve. In that, yes, if a woman chooses to have a baby, there's different choices that she needs to make that a man does. There's no blame game around it. It's just the fact that this is where we are. And the one stat that I found really interesting is when there's surveying of women and men, women are more likely to buy property than men. So if the goal was 50-50, that doesn't actually represent the sentiment out there. If there weren't any barriers, women would actually own more property than men in Australia, in New Zealand, in any countries across Australia. So I'm really passionate about, the ladies that come and see me that are in the process of a divorce, or I love my lovely same-sex relationship couples. Got some lovely ladies that I've worked with in the past. I love all of my clients, but I think helping overcome some of those challenges, to give them confidence, meeting people that come to me and are not so sure of what's possible, showing them what is possible, and then helping them to make that real. That's very motivating. And I really felt like I was doing that one-on-one, person at a time, but I was just leaning into a conversation with you, Bryce, about how could we permeate this a little bit more out there. I already knew it was on your radars, trying to get more ladies on the podcast. Ladies are much less likely to ask for raises. They're much less likely to ask for pay rises, much less likely to put themselves on a podcast, much less likely to tell their story. So I think the fact that you're leaning into having more ladies representing their stories and showing people what's possible, I'd like to be really motivational around that for helping to close that gap. And you said, well, how about you come on the podcast and talk about that?
If I bring everyone into a fly on the wall, you and I meet, and you are incredible. So you just shared the same level of passion that the conversation you and I had, and you pulled up all these stats, and we went and had a look at all these websites, and you were ready to go. And then I just looked at you and I said, "This is amazing." I could see you going, "Great, getting some momentum here." And then I said, "But nobody wants to hear about gender inequity and the gender pay gap from two blokes. Like, who wants to hear that?
Male and pale blokes, right? Yeah.
Two white, middle-aged, blessed blokes. No one wants to hear that. So I said, Amanda, who's going to have this? Who's going to be the person that's that says this? And you go, well, yeah, you started. And I just looked at you and I said, it's got to be you. And if we could replay back then, the colour went out of your face. You looked at me as if I'd asked you to cut off a leg.
Yep.
And then you said, leave it with me and let me think about it. And you did. And then there was some time between that conversation and then you giving me the green light. But I'm stoked when, if you could see the high fives I was doing, mental high fives, when you sent me the little note, you said, Bryce, I've thought about this. And I think you're right. I think I don't think this message is going to land if it's delivered by two blokes. So I'm coming on, and here we are today having you on. So well done, because I think I've glossed over the fact that was a big deal for you to consider doing that.
Well, I wanted to do it. It's really important to me. I don't know if this is an old lady thing, but I just want to live my life authentically. I just want to, be honest, sit in a space that serves me. I don't know, I have a little less, I don't want to put airs and graces on or a face on. I just want to sit in a really authentic space. And so if I came on, I wanted to do it in a way where it was an open book and you could ask me any questions. And obviously the initial part of the podcast reflects probably most of the initial nervousness. I wanted to have conversations with my family and make sure that they were okay with me telling my version of that story, which I did. And that's very much a thing that I kind of put in the past and try and leave in the past, even though it's, obviously impacts everything that you do. So that was part of that. I think the other part is just, being out in an audience of this size is not my comfort zone. But if I help one person, then that's the message.
And you nailed it right there. Amanda, there's a couple of things I want to say. Obviously, as someone who, has founded the business that you work for, and, I call all of our team empowerers, because we find people like you who have proven experience, proven life lessons, and you've created a career path from pharmaceuticals into property advisory work, but you've done it the right way. You've got your qualifications in behind you, and that's mandatory in terms of that, and served your time as an associate, develop up those skills and all of those types of things as well. So there's a couple of things, a couple of layers that I want to put on that. The first one is coming back to, empowerment for women as well. And we definitely know in the last episode before the summer series, we talked about what money means to you, right? And ultimately, the clear number one was security. And that is that financial security piece. And that is very challenging for women for all of the reasons why you suggest it is. And that is just that children especially impact incomes and have a massive time commitment. And so a lot of people think there's potential trade-offs for career or having children, and that impacts income. And if you don't have income, you can't get lending. And if you can't get lending, you can't get a home. So all of those things are real. And Bryce and I have spoken often about, the most challenged sort of demographic is the single female, and especially the single female with children. And that is very challenged if you have a child outside of having some financial security behind you, because you are forever chasing your tail on that. So the work that you do and our team does for all, of those women and, same-sex couples, as well as obviously, male and female couples and singles who want to get on it. That's why we do what we do. And ultimately that's what this podcast is about. It's about getting that message out there, irrespective of whether you work with us or work with another professional organisation who can demonstrate that they put the customer first, and they basically look at the financial situation and they work from a goals point of view first, in terms of what are you trying to achieve and what's reasonably possible, and we'll come at it from a conservative nature. If you want to go on, build a property empire, we're not for you, and this pod's not for you, right? I mean, we'll give you the fundamentals in terms of what that looks like. So, this is the very, very first time we've ever had a staff member on the podcast in a summer series role. And so we didn't obviously lead with that at the start of the show, but we're certainly telling that story now, because it does give a clear indication in terms of we practice what we preach. It's the type of people that we're looking for to be able to help others. And that's why it ultimately is about, we talk about building wealthier tomorrows. We talk about achieving financial peace. We talk about taking people from Pain Island to Pleasure Island. All of those things are real as part of this journey. And what you've delivered in this podcast is an authentic outlook on someone who is very relatable to, someone who I related to in terms of some of that sort of idea of financial abuse that can happen. I had it at a lower scale, you had it at a more severe scale in terms of what that looks like. But they are stories. This is real. This is life. And our job is to try and say to people, don't give up, don't lose hope. You can still pivot midway through, a 5-year plan to get 10 properties, but then say, well, wait a minute, we've got all of these health issues that have come up. And so you've said, well, what's part of that? Well, part of that is the environment and the life that we've built for ourselves. So if we reverse ourselves out of that life and that environment, we don't have to go to, and it's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system that we operate. Generally speaking, there are some proactive means by that, but all that we're doing here is, we talk about a medical analogy where we go and see our doctor, and rather than just getting a script for this, we say, well, what are you trying to achieve? And we get right down into the nitty gritty in terms of what that looks like. And so we can put a plan of action rather than, someone turning 55 or 60 and realizing, wait a minute, they're going to be living off the pension, or they're not going to be financially free. So we want to do that preventative work first, that planning work first, that action work first, before it becomes too dangerous and too risky to then start taking on those risks. So I just want to thank you personally for entrusting, coming along on the journey with us and being one of the key members in our organisation that basically plays a role, in your specialisation, and you help people solve really big problems in their households, and you give them hope. And, that's the most powerful thing that we can give all of the customers that we work with, and we give them direction. We talk about making the invisible visible, and then, it gives them a plan to act. And, Bryce and I have been talking about this podcast for 460, 70, 80 shows, whatever it is, all trying to educate, move the dial in education and move the dial on action. And so you're a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for allowing us to share your story, and for also me to putting some icing on that cake.
Thank you, Ben. My pleasure.
Amanda, I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but I'm really proud of you. I spend a lot of time with you in the business, and what I can tell from that time that we spend is technically you're very capable and competent. People could just hear that, but you've got the most beautiful heart, and I think your clients get the beneficiary of that heart. And I thought I knew your backstory pretty well, but I clearly didn't know enough about it. And so I'm really excited to have learned a bit more today. My final question for you is coercive control. What is your message to anyone who's listening to this who is experiencing some form of coercive control, some form of marginalisation or discrimination of any sort that you are passionate about? What would be your seed planting message to those people who probably the mountain probably feels a little higher right now as they listen to this, or as a friend is encouraging them to listen to this? What's the the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step? What is the single step for those people?
The first thing I would say is just try and say to yourself, and it might not feel like it fits at first, but just keep saying it. Just say to yourself that you're worth it, and you're worth something better than this. And you might hear a lot of noise that suggests that you're not, or that you're not good enough, but you are worthwhile. You do deserve it, and you do deserve to live better than the circumstance. And there are some very, very real barriers and challenges, no doubt. And even especially now, right, when the interest rates and challenges and all that, it's not as easy to just click your fingers and change out of a really challenging situation to a different into a different situation. It's not that straightforward. But what I would say is, if you start with self and say, I do deserve better, I do want better, lean into the fact that there are some places like 1-800-RESPECT and some other places that are very geared around helping you in a way that I'm in no way qualified to do, but that can really help you. And I think what it would be is to just say, look, the mountain does look big. And yep, the mountain is big. I'm not going to lie to you that the mountain's not big. But if you are able to map out some sort of road forward and just take one step at a time. And as you take each step, you will start to build more confidence, and then you'll take another step and you'll build some more. So, I'm going to throw a couple of like little examples in here, but it's going to be different to different people's situation. Obviously, being married to a cop and hearing about some current changes in legislation in that space just yesterday, there are certainly support services out there within the police that specialise in that and can help you on that side of things. But there can even be some really straightforward things around having access to your documents, maybe having access to setting yourself up your own bank account, lots of little things like that, building a little bit more of a network, even though there may be some coercive control about, having friends and knowing other people. Still hanging on to that and having your network and trying to build support services and start to take one little step forward at a time towards a plan. Now, whether that's on the lower end of the scale, simply having a conversation with your partner and saying this doesn't serve me, and giving them the opportunity to see if there's some insight there and some change, right through to, well, let's use some emergency services and take a step like that. I've got one of my properties in Melbourne that is being rented out by an organisation, and they help people in that situation. In various situations, life without barriers, and so there are emergency places that you can go, and some things like that. So everybody's situation is unique, but you deserve better, and you are the best judge of whether or not you should start with a conversation and hope to have some more change, or whether that's really just going to be a drop in the ocean and there are some better support services to just take one step forward and create that different life.
Beautifully said, Amanda. And yeah, please, if people are in that situation, there are some resources out there for you. So do your best to get access to them. We've made this summer series all about what money means to you, and it's obviously very clear it's self-determining for you, and your mother has been a great inspiration for your story. Time with family, providing for family, work-life balance and freedom. So you can see those themes in terms of when you think about the discovery section in Moorr and putting those sort of, when what does money mean to you, you've highlighted those in a strong way. You're using the Money Smart system as part of your journey. You're using the Moorr platform to help manage everything you do. And obviously you've got the power of our simulator in the advisory business as well to be able to do all that sort of work. So, I think, what I've got out of the summer series this time around, and I mentioned it to Bryce earlier, because it's a consistent theme. Like, I'm always looking for themes coming out of all these different types of things. And Bryce did mention, and you mentioned it just a moment ago, it does require effort. It does require work. Nothing comes easy in a lot of senses. And your mum's story about, basically separation and going through those tougher times. Sometimes you go through those tougher times because the reward is so much greater at the other side of that. And I think, I've seen a lot of effort and hard work going into these types of results. So don't just think that you can sit on the couch and magic's going to happen for yourself. You've got to want it. There's a need, but you've got to want it, right? And so if you can't find that intrinsic motivation to basically make change, nothing will change. It's a message to everyone to sort of say, well, I'm hearing all these great stories about world-class athletes finding mastery, doing all these other things. Well, they did it through thousands and thousands of hours of effort, and they also did it with support around them. And I think that's a really nice message to finish off on today's pod.
Yeah, I agree. So, folks, the request is if you know someone who's in a situation that Amanda's described before, maybe just let them. That first step is just for them to hear Amanda's story. Just share the episode so they can hear that not only has Amanda navigated some of these challenges, but her mother did it in an incredibly courageous way at a time that, a lot of the information that's around now wasn't there. So hopefully that is just but one way that you can make a positive impact in the world. Amanda, I'm very sure that you will continue to make incredible change and impacts in people's lives. But on behalf of everyone here on the Property Couch, Amanda, thanks for joining us today.
My absolute pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Amanda.
Well, there you go, Ben. I'm just so proud of Amanda for her vulnerability and her courage to actually come and tell that story, because I can still remember the look on her eye when I said, this is the story for you to tell, and then the journey, and then the incredible story that you've just heard now. I think I'm hoping that's had a major impact on our community, because it had a major impact on me.
Well, obviously that's the type of talent that she is. We're very proud to have her in the organisation. But to share her story, it is a story of money psychology, right? But what it is a story that sort of allows people to overcome those things. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes we don't fall too far from the tree, and then sort of we're stuck in these, these habits and behaviours. What Amanda's been able to do, and it hasn't come easy. She mentions that in terms of how she's talking about the process that she had to go through to change her story. Right. And that's why I think it's such a fitting final episode for the summer series, because it is a story about overcoming those challenges, but also, not having that as a mooring line, as an anchor, in terms of being able to get away from that. So obviously we're super proud of Amanda and what she's gone on to achieve, and she's been able to achieve that financial peace and that financial success, but also family success. The money is just really a safety net for her, and ultimately allowing her to be in control. And that's what she and her mother didn't feel that they had in the relationships that they were in. So incredibly powerful story.
Incredibly powerful. So for me, the key takeaway is this, right? From Amanda's story, two words. If someone finds themselves where they can relate to some form of segregation or some form of marginalisation that Amanda felt, the first two words to getting out of that, Ben, and it could be controversial, and I'll talk it through, is to say it's my fault. My fault. Because nobody's coming to rescue you.
No.
And what happened to Amanda wasn't her fault, but staying stuck in circumstances and doing nothing about it, if she didn't change, would have been her fault.
How many people blame others? exactly your point.
It's so important, and I want to be super mindful. Some people might hear that and go, "Not," because I grew up in a lower middle class family, Ben, and for all intents and purposes, I had a great childhood, right? So I get that people could say, "Oh, that's nice for you to stay in a privileged position," but please hear me. What I'm saying here, I'm not saying what happens to people that are terrible is their fault. What I'm saying is, it's your fault if you stay stuck there.
Yes, good.
If you stay stuck
Good
there,
distinction.
because Amanda chose that she was not going to let that be the story that she lived out. She's one of my favorite humans. I love it because I spend a lot of time with her. I love it, but she's decided that at some point, whether she articulated those two words or not, she goes, "If it's to be, it's up to me. That's just one of yours." Or, "This is not a Disney movie. Nobody is coming to save you.
Yeah.
You actually have to do it yourself." So, folks, let that land. If it jarred with you, please hear my heart. Some people have had some terrible things happen to them, and I'm not justifying that. But what I'm saying is, if you let that become the story going forward in your life, when that is a thing of the past, that ultimately becomes a decision that you get to make. There is enough opportunity in this country, if you're listening in Australia, to get yourself out of poverty, to get yourself out of terrible situations, because the free resources are actually available in this country. All you got to do is go to YouTube, and there's lots of ways just to flick over the change in mindset. So that was, of all the tactical, all the story, all of the journey that she went on. For me, I hope that's the biggest takeaway that everyone catches, that they get to be the destiny chooser, not circumstances, no matter how bad they are. They get to say, once they say those two words, where I am right now is my fault if I don't make any steps to change that trajectory.
And so if you're searching for sort of context and learning in that area, victim mindset might be what you might type in there, because that builds off that psychology of trying to overcome that victim mindset and move on. So, mate, an awesome way to finish. And Bryce, we've also been promising right throughout the summer series that we have a really important announcement to make around what we're doing with the platform to allow people to get to that next stage.
It's true. Yeah, because I guess if we tie a bow on summer series, hopefully you've seen 9 scenarios where people are on a journey of lifestyle by design. And so the mission of our podcast is largely, if you chuck it up to its highest form, it is lifestyle by design, and all of the stuff that we give, all the content and all the resources, all form part of that umbrella of how do you actually set a path, choose within yourself that this is the path that I want to take, and what does that look like? So you're right. That's our mission.
That's our mission, and then you break that down and sort of like educate and then take action. So obviously through the airwaves and now through our YouTube channel, we've been able to give that in an audio and a visual context. But what about the tools? What about the sort of the infrastructure? What about the devices and applications that I need to put it down on paper and make it happen? Well, really, that's the vision of Moorr. And, we've built our 5-step process that we have in the book, in the Armchair Guide to Property Investing. If you haven't got a copy, you can obviously go to the website, check out the show notes and get yourself a copy. But there's a 5-step proven process that we've used, and that's helped build literally hundreds, if not thousands, of millionaires and some multi-millionaires. Now, again, that's not what we're about, but in terms of financial peace, financial security, financial lifestyle by design. And we've got this 5-step process, really simple: clarify, evaluate, plan, implement, and manage. Right? They are our pillars. And of course, when you come in seeing an advisory business, that's everything we work through as an advisor. What Amanda would do is all of those things. So how have we built the Moorr platform? Well, there's 4 main pillars in the Moorr platform. There's lifestyle, there is money, there is property, and there is wealth. Okay, they're the sort of things. So when the product team and we sit down and we get feedback from everyone, we're looking at those things, but we're building it in a framework that is by our 5-step process. So I'm going to build up for obviously the mega announcement that I've got, but let's just go through a couple of those. So inside clarify, what tools do I use inside Moorr to clarify? Well, if you break it down into 2 themes, the first theme is money management, which we're really big on, because obviously what do you have to do, Bryce? To actually invest, you have to
spend less than you earn.
There we go. So we've got to obviously clarify financials, but also clarify our big rocks in the jar, our goals, all the things that we're doing. So we've got two main categories in there. So we have my financials, which we talked about just before the summer series. So we've rebuilt the core, the engine that then captures all that information. And now you can set them up into financial cards, which makes life easier. You can go deeper or you can keep it simple. Or in the My Goals, it's always about setting those targets and organizing those goals in a sequential order. Number one. Let's go to number two, evaluate. What tools do I use in the Moorr platform to do my evaluation? Well, what do most people do, Bryce? The curiosity about, the envy, and in terms of what's sort of happening there. What are they thinking about in terms of their position versus others?
Well, Morgan Housel says it best. He says happiness is actually quite simple. The hard bit is when we start comparing it to others.
Absolutely.
So
we have MoneyFit.
Yeah.
So MoneyFit is that tool where now I don't think it should be one of those things to use for motivation per se, but curiosity is always going to need to be solved. So if you want to go and have a look at what you spend on groceries for your household composition versus other people in your state or across Australia, or any one of our expense items in that list, or any income in that list, it does give you a chance to just sensitivity test in terms of how much are we spending on this compared to, and it basically has a histogram that allows you to then look at, well, we sit roughly in the middle or in the top quartile or down in the lower area. So that is the MoneyFit. So that's one part. Now on the wealth creation side though, and this is the big part for us about motivation and getting that, is our wealth speed and our wealth clock. They are the next generational tools that are about you seeing whether you're problem aware or opportunity aware. Now most people go through life not realizing the problem that they've got. So we built those tools really as a trigger for you to assess some simple things. Is how much is my money working hard for me? So spend less than you earn, trap the surplus, and then put that surplus to work. But then saying basically, well, where do I sit? Like, what action do I need to take today, not in 5 years' time or 10 years' time when you're in your 50s or 60s and going, all right, now I've got to think about my retirement. No, thinking about your retirement needs to be over decades, not over years as well. So those are the main tools when it comes to evaluate. What's the next one? Plan. So with plan, what have we got for plan?
Well, clearly the flagship for ever since we started the podcast was around money smarts, right? So if we have the fundamental belief that people should spend less than they earn, they should trap that surplus, and then they got a big decision to make, because some people could spend less than they earn, but then make decisions about lifestyle that don't really give them any security for tomorrow. So our hope is that you trap the surplus, and then it gives you an opportunity to go, why don't I put a large portion of that trapped surplus towards really building the moat and creating real wealth through, clearly for us it's through buying property.
Yep. Clearly we have a bias,
but whatever investment choice you like. So a little bit for tomorrow, and then you can carve off a little bit to for the here and now, right? To create the experiences. But the flagship underpinning all of the conversations we've had pretty much from day dot has been our Money Smart system. I remember on the podcast, Ben, our first website had a one-pager where people could download how to use it. It's now obviously turned into a book. But that's the big part of that wealth creation story.
Yeah, it is. And so the Make Money Simple Again book is effectively the manual for setting up Money Smarts. Now, what's important about that is Money Smarts has two functions. It's trapping that surplus, but it's also getting proficient with cash flow management. And then it's where most people fall over, and that's where traditional budgets fall over, is when I'm looking at money stretching, like, I've got these big decisions that I need to make. So how is that going to be impacted on my cash flow? That's where the money stretch tool comes in. So if you've got a big decision to make around having a child, a private school, public school, or interest rates have gone up significantly, you can plug in, you can take a copy of My Financial, you bring it across into this sandpit, and then you can play around with your numbers. And that's going to basically tell you how much time you have available with the cash flow that you've got. So they are the two main tools when it comes to planning. And of course, from a wealth creation point of view, there's a lot of moving parts, and we would say get some professional advice around the planning work that you're doing. And if you're thinking property is the way to go, again, we'd recommend you speak to a property investment advisor or something along those lines. So that's true. Implementation. So plan and then implement and ultimately manage. So the implementation is part of the taking action phase that we talk about there. So from an implementation point of view, let's just focus on money management. Well, again, this is why Money Smarts is so important, because it's a rules-based money management system. It's not just about setting a target and trapping that. It's actually, how do I operate on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. The other day we were at basketball training with the kids, and one of the because I'm training the team, one of the players' mum, and Sam goes, "Can we go and get some sushi?" And mum and my Andrea goes, "No, Sam, we've only got $1.50 in the bank." But he stood down, and then that friend the next day gave Andy a call and said, "Is everything okay?"
You're living a lifestyle account.
I couldn't help but hearing that you only have $1.50 in the account, and it's
7-day float.
Our 7-day float only had $1.50 in the account. Sam knew because we've
trained.
He knows because we have that rolling system. So, folks, I promise you, this is not a theory that we reckon you should do that we don't do.
Yeah.
The Money Smart, the 7-day float has been the biggest game changer, bar none, in our household for the last decade. So that just goes to show that A, I'm walking the talk. B, I still to this day can't think of a better system where you pay yourself once and make it last. And I guess the third takeaway there is my 10-year-old son actually knows exactly what Mum meant by that. Didn't mean that we only have $1.50 overall, but it meant we have $1.50, and it was a Tuesday night, and we pay ourselves on a Thursday, which is what we talk about in the book. So that $1.50 had to last because the school holidays bin and was getting turned up very quickly. So
it does, doesn't it? It does, absolutely. Just took the kids to the movies. How much is that? Oh, okay, right here.
Yeah.
So that's the implementation on the money side. We've got some exciting announcements throughout 2024 on really ramping up our property management story. So for investors who have investment properties, you're running a business, right? So the bookkeeping and all that needs to be important. So we are well on our way in terms of building out, and we'll be releasing some tools throughout 2024, which will really focus in on, because, the vision of Moorr is to be the best money and property management tool, the one place that you need to go to manage all of your portfolio properties if you're blessed enough to have multiple properties. But if you're also aspiring to do that, then this is the one place you need to be. It's available on mobile and web. So that's going to be coming in the implementation side as well.
And 23 was kind of, if you're honest, it was a frustrating year because there was a lot of, for those in the game, there was a lot of tech debt to clean up.
Yes.
So it meant that a lot of features couldn't be layered on top until that tech debt was sorted out.
Well, I think in speaking honestly, we've got an advisory business that uses this platform as a client portal. And so whenever we want to change things, there's lots of moving parts that you go, oh, of course it affects it. And so bringing all of that together just means that our development last year was a little bit slower in terms of our product.
The 24 is the features year.
Woohoo! Here we come. And rebuilding that My Financials engine is part of that story. So now finally manage this. Here we go, right? So from the money management and sort of day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week, year-to-year type of, still Money Smarts. That is the go-to platform, and we'll be releasing some new feature updates for Money Smarts hopefully in the next 2 months. So that is being worked on right now. I've seen the prototypes of that, and they are looking great. So stand by for that. But Bryce, in terms of wanting to be able to build wealth, right, this is where it gets quite interesting, right? Because most people, when it comes to starting with getting fit or whatever, it takes time. You've got to build up momentum, and that's really hard, and that's why a lot of people drop off. So what I'm about to announce to you that will be released in early February, is the concept of historical tracking and these new insights that are going to be available right down on the financial cards. So every financial card inside the platform will allow you to basically track history and then see those insights in both a historical timeline, but also potentially in terms of an allocation of a categorization. So you get a sense of how much am I spending on this and what is that as a part of my overall allocation. Now, I cannot underestimate how powerful this is in terms of building habits and behaviors. And the big story here, why is this so important, is you can go back in time. You can go, so it's not just about today moving forward.
Marty McFly.
We have built a time machine We build a time machine that will allow you, a money management time machine, a financial time machine that will allow you to go in there and put all of your past history. So if you've got a couple of old spreadsheets hanging around the place, or if you've done a back of envelope sort of financial position 10 years ago, 20 years ago. In fact, I was just thinking about the other day, I looked at all my old loan applications. And inside a loan application, you actually have to put your financial position. So I know in one of our filing cabinets at home, I've got an old ANZ.
You're right, mate. You're struggling to sleep. If they got sleeping tablets now. You don't have to look at the loan applications.
I know, but I did a financial position now, and I know I've done financial positions over time. Right? So I'm super keen to now go in and plug all of that past history in, because what it will do for me, if I think about saving money in bank accounts, if I think about moving the asset value forward and show, what did I buy? Well, I bought that property in 2001 for $395,000. Now it's worth $1.8 million. But I have done some valuations over time, so I'll go and I'll be able to track that progress in terms of from my mortgage point of view. Sometimes you just look at your mortgage and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. But imagine if over 5 years you could go back and get a balance from an old statement 5 years ago and just put that one in there, and that's a data point. And that data point will appear in the insights layer. So a lot of people have been using spreadsheets for this type of work. Spreadsheets are gone. We're moving into the 21st century. You will have all of this in cloud available for you, easily accessible both on your mobile and also on the web app as well. So this is the time to move into the 21st century. And because it's cloud-based, most of those old spreadsheets, maybe the 97 is an example. So Excel 97 isn't supported by Microsoft anymore. So if there's a glitch, you can't actually go back and get it fixed. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of having that historical data, because it's super motivational.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and the way I can think about it, last year I spent a lot of time journaling, Ben.
Yeah.
And so then what came out of that was the concept of journal mining. So you go back and you have a look at what you were thinking, and what's interesting is you go back in December and look at what was I thinking in March. Interesting. And then you can actually measure the growth that you're currently feeling based on some of the thoughts that you're having back then. So that's kind of trying to think of an analogy on how to land the plane for that. It's a bit like that. You don't realize what you were thinking at the time, because it is the thought gets easily superseded, or the statement gets easily superseded. But for me, I just use the one word, what you describe, insights. I actually, instead of just having a spreadsheet with the portfolio that I scramble to keep up to date to get to the account at the end of the year, there's actually something that I can go in and get some meaningful insights as to the performance of a whole range of things, including expenses, that show me how far I've come, where I've come from, which, to your point, is actually keeping people motivated along the journey. Because let's be honest, when you have a get-rich-slow program like ours, there's no adrenaline.
No.
It's
well, this is. I promise you, this is going to be an endorphin hit. So if you go back and find an old financial position and you put that data in, you're going to. There was progress made there. So and of course we will continue to build on that. But the way in which it's been designed, one input in one location, then you've got a historical logged in aside. But you put that in there, we can use that bit of that data point and put it all throughout the insights that you're talking about. And that's the way we want it. It's not like, when the spreadsheet's like, I've got to move that data, or I've got to, find that page, add that page to here to get it one spot, and we basically do all the work in terms of showing those insights. So I cannot be more excited about it. Of course, we will come back and talk about it again in a later episode. In fact, we're building up an episode about, what the research says about human behavior and why it's so important to do this particular thing. So I won't give away that clue as well, but we'll have an episode on that in February at some point as well. So we will let you know when it goes live, but that's what we promised, and it's going to be early Feb.
So, folks, why are you thinking at the end of what was a wonderful summer series have we laboured this point? It's really because we are genuinely committed to helping you have resources and tools that actually make you move the needle. So you're hearing this towards the end of January, so you've got an opportunity just to springboard 24 like no other year that you've had. And yes, we have spoken about it at some length, but you can get access to it for free. It's to the point that I was saying before about Amanda's story. You get to choose at this point, and yes, if you come into our business, we have staff and overheads, which means that we have to charge a fee to have the done for you model if you use our business. But this allows you to actually download the app for free, use the desktop version for free, and for the lifetime of us talking about this platform, it has been free. So
Yep.
it gives you an opportunity to do all those 5 steps, those critical 5 steps that Ben talked to before. But yeah, the reason we're leaning in at this point is because we actually want you to have a ripper 2024. We want you to spend less than you earn. For those of you that have investment properties, we want you to have genuine insights that allow you to make better decisions. And in an environment where in the first part of the year you're going to be navigating some negative headlines, you need to be rock solid in your resolve about where you're headed and about where you are, and these things allow you to do both of those things. Here's where I'm headed. Here's the progress along the way. Oh, by the way, here's some insights of where I've been in the past, and allows you to have that sort of resolve in yourself when others might get wobbly, Ben.
That's true. And just, we've also released a couple of interim features, which is bulk edit and bulk upload. And so that allows you to also, see it in a more concise manner if you want to. And I think there's some real value. So if I'm doing my annual review, as an example, I would go into the bulk edit. So it just makes the cards in, table format. And so I can quickly then work out which Money Smarts jar that I want to have in, and I want to adjust the annual. So those people, and we know the bulk of our people who are doing their annual rollovers in Money Smarts, that's where you want to go. So if you need to learn more about that, go into the website, moorr.com.au, go to new features, and you'll see some articles and blogs and videos in terms of some of that. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast several weeks later and playing catch up, that website where all the new blogs and new features are going in there, that's where you'll get all that information. And of course, by that time, historical tracking and also insights will be live.
moorr.com.au is where you can check that out, folks. So again, as we're wrapping up what's been an incredible summer series for us, it's exciting. A couple of things I want to say to you. If you've listened to these stories and something stirred in you, I want you to act on that stirring in your belly. I want you to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. I get to read all of those stories, and we get to make invitations to folks who want to share that. So I normally do a call out towards the end of the year, but if you've had a stirring where you think, I want to be a part of that, just come and leave your details. We'll reach out to you, say thanks, and when the timing's right, we'll get you to come on and share your story. So number one. Number two, if you have been inspired by any of the stories, I want you to feel the inertia that might come up to stay status quo, to remain unchanged, to think it was a good idea and I've got to get around to that. I promise you, the lower your action threshold, the better it is that you will get success, because this podcast, if lifestyle design is the umbrella of what underpins our mission, probably the number one tactic that we're trying to do is get people to take action.
Yep.
And that's why Summer Series was so important.
And the best way to motivate yourself is set some goals. Set some goals for this year, and then start to think about, well, do I need finance to achieve those? And that should get you started. So the first step, as our good mate in terms of Atomic Habits, James Clear, would say, shoes are by the bed. So for us, download the app, start with your My Goals, and then start to think, okay, all right, well, now I've started. I'm into it. So that's the best way in which I would give the tip for that to happen.
Do it now, folks. We have an epic February coming up. We have got our Ben and my personal property market outlook. It's coming. We will have a commentator on at the end of the month to talk about how they see the market. We've got some wrapping, some best moments from Summer Series as actionable takeaways that Ben and I can encourage you to take action this year. And we're also going to help you, to Ben's point earlier, on how the tracking actually helps you achieve your goals. So it's a big February we've got planned. So we want to encourage you to stick around. Folks, we recently went over 100,000 unique listeners on our podcast, which is something that we're very, very proud of. So we're asking you to help us spread the word. If you've had value from the podcast in 2023, or for some of that you've cut a couple of laps around since the beginning, it would be wonderful if you could share the podcast this year. We've got so many amazing things lined up for the Property Couch in 2024. So we want to share it with as many people as possible so that we can help as many people as possible achieve lifestyle by design, Ben. So it's been fun. Summer's always good. The good news is the summer series finishes at the end of January, but
Aussie Open's on.
Yeah, and we still got February and summer here in Australia, which is good. So, mate, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Act on it, folks. See you next week.